Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. Welcome to the Patent Pathways Inclusion webinar for interviewing and hiring. For those of you new to Patent Pathways, I want to take a brief moment to describe what Patent Pathways is all about. It all started with a paper we published at Harity that found, and you all have probably heard this statistic, that there are more practitioners named Michael registered to practice than there are racially diverse women in the patent field. So we wanted to start a program to address that issue that was scalable and would bring more racially diverse women into the patent bar. So our first few iterations of our program are focused on the subgroup within racially diverse women and specifically Black women. The goal is to provide each participant with the tools to take and pass the patent bar. All participant patent bar expenses are paid for. There's no cost to attend the program. And all of this is possible through the generous gifts of our program partners and sponsors, many of you who are on the call today. So thank you so much for that. Once the participants finish the patent bar review prep, we open up a matching platform, which is set to open up in about a week. And this is where our law firm partners come in. Depending on tech area, location, and your current needs, law firms can search our matching platform for a candidate that meets your needs. And so our goal for this program is to make sure that every participant has a job opportunity, whether it's part-time, a summer position, a full-time position, so they get that first experience that is so crucial for getting into the field. Last year, as this is our second year of the program, we learned that a lot of our participants had varying interviewing and hiring experiences from law firms. And so we thought, hey, let's crowdsource the best practices of inclusion and learn from each other about how to make the interviewing and hiring process as inclusive as possible. So hence the purpose for the webinar. We didn't have this last year. But before we get into our panel discussion, I'd like to hand it over to a good friend of mine, Jeremiah Chan, who's Director and Associate General Counsel at Meta. And for those of you who don't know a lot about Meta's team, Jeremiah has built one of the most outstanding and diverse in-house patent teams in the country, dare I say the world. He has a few words to share about his own journey surrounding hiring and inclusion. So I am going to hand it over to you, Jeremiah.
Thanks so much, Elaine, and just honored to be here with you all and excited to talk about such a great program, Patent Pathways. But I thought to kind of set the stage, what we could start with is just talking about the problem that kind of brings us all together. And Elaine kind of mentioned some of the stats around, more patent practitioners named Mike than racially diverse women. To put a finer point on that, only 22% of patent practitioners are women, 6.5% are racially diverse, and only 1.7% are racially diverse women. And unfortunately, that's kind of the nature of systemic inequality. And because it's systemic, I think it's not hard to find similar inequity in virtually all aspects of society. And so one that I wanted to briefly talk about is just taking the most popular spectator sport in our country, the National Football League. As some of you know, back in 2003, the National Football League established this rule called the Rooney Rule, which essentially requires every NFL team to interview at least one minority candidate for every head coaching position that they have open. Now, over the years, they've expanded that to other leadership roles as well. But it's been 20 years. And so I'm a data person, and I like to look at the data around, are things working, are they not? And so let's just take a quick inventory of the NFL today. Today, about 60%, a little over 60% of all NFL players identify as Black. We only have 3 Black head coaches among 32 teams, and there isn't a single Black owner. Now, compare that for a second to one team just down the street from here, about 10 minutes away, the San Francisco 49ers. In 2017, they hired a young coach named Kyle Shanahan, who some of you may recognize that name. He's actually the son of a legendary coach, Mike Shanahan. And just to be clear, Kyle is a white head coach who reports to a white general manager and a white owner, all males. Now, if you've heard Kyle speak, he openly acknowledges the great privilege that he enjoys. not only as a white male, but also coming from a legacy family of football. But what's really interesting and why I share this story with you is because it's interesting to see how Kyle has used his privilege. In just a few years, the 49ers have hired more talent from historically marginalized groups than any other team in the league. Their coaching staff has had over a dozen senior positions filled by people of color. It includes 10 African Americans, a person of Lebanese descent, and they even hired Katie Sowers, who was the first woman and openly gay coach to ever coach in the Super Bowl. The impact is even farther reaching when you consider where many of these talented individuals have gone since starting on the 49ers. Now, 3 of them are head coaches on other teams, and 2 are general managers. So it's really interesting to note that one individual was able to do far more than the entire league over 2 decades. So just kind of let that sink in, because the reason why I share it with you is because it's the same hope that we have for our profession. Our profession is not going to fix itself. Take it from me. I've served on the ABA's DEI task force. I've worked for the US Patent Office, all working on this DEI initiative and changing our profession. Great work, but it's clear to me they are not going to change our profession. It's up to individuals. Change happens when individuals are intentional. And we all need, many of us on this call today, in this webinar, we need to create that change. Now, I can't not share a story that I think this was the main reason why Elaine asked me to come today. But my own journey has been interesting. And part of why I share it is perhaps it resonates with you, and perhaps it gives you a little insight into, I think, the work that we all need to do. So when I look back at my own career, I did on-campus interviews back at the law firm, and then I started as a hiring manager in-house back in 2006, where I started building teams and hiring people. I think about all those years where I had really, really good intentions. And the problem is my actions didn't match those intentions. I went around speaking about the value of diverse teams. I often complained publicly about the lack of diverse candidates in the patent profession and the broken patent pipeline. But as I started thinking back on my decisions and my track record, I started to realize that every time I had an opportunity to hire talented people of color, I would always come up with some bullshit reason why they weren't the right fit for my team. It was hard to confront that. And honestly, that's the scary thing about systemic inequality. It's not just everywhere around us, it actually is in us. It's found its way into our hearts and minds, and that's why it's so pervasive. And that's why it's so hard to actually see the kind of change we all want to see. I took a long, hard look in the mirror, and what I realized is that I needed to confront my own biases and the discrimination that I had in me over a lifetime. And I really needed to be more intentional and actually take action to actually contradict that, right? All of those problems that I was inherently influencing my decisions with. And honestly, once I did that, everything changed. As Elaine mentioned today, I get to be a part of the strongest team I have ever known. And we are strong because we have amazing cognitive diversity. We have so many different perspectives and opinions that we bring to the table. And honestly, we understand our clients better because we look like them. And that's something that a lot of other patent teams that I talk to, they just don't have. And they're trying to actually engage more inclusively their inventors. It's really hard when all of your people are homogenous and are not diverse at all. We also realized that we needed a diverse outside counsel lineup to engage our inventors. I actually talked to some of our inventors who said, we love the work you're doing to be more inclusive as a patent program, but every time we have ideas, you keep sending us white males to help us patent our ideas. What's going on with that? And so we realized it's all part of a system, and we need to make sure that there's representation across the board. Now, some of you may wonder, like, how did that realization happen for me? How did I confront those biases that I had? And honestly, the answer may be more simple than you might think. I surrounded myself with people of courage, people who I could see doing the right thing, and people who would speak truth into my life. And not to put some folks on the spot right now, but these people are Elaine Spector, who leads Patent Pathways. These people are Braxton Davis on my team, who started the Patent Pipeline program, which is a very similar program to Patent Pathways. And now Elaine and Braxton are BFFs. And Mike Binns on my team, who actually created ADAPT, which is the first of its kind industry collective that finally gathers all these amazing DEI programs, puts them in one place. If you haven't visited it, it's adapt.legal, and they're all there, including Patent Pathways and the Patent Pipeline program, so people can easily find them and access them. It's not that hard to get involved now with ADAPT, showing us the way. All I would say is surround yourself with people of courage and just watch what happens. Amazing things start to happen when you do that. Now, I lost my dad in 2021 of September, and I find that ever since he passed away, I think about him all the time. When I'm driving, when I'm taking walks, when I'm out with my kids, and I think about his amazing life, but a lot of the stories and lessons he taught me. So let me close my remarks with one story from my dad. Back in 1963, my dad was finishing up college, and then during breaks, he would go to New York City and work in Chinatown restaurants, washing dishes, waiting tables to make some extra bucks to help pay for tuition. And so he was doing this in 1963, working at a small Chinese restaurant in Chinatown. And one night, two of his buddies barged in and said, "We're going to DC tonight." He said, whoa, what's going on? "We're going to DC tonight. There's a big rally tomorrow, and we actually bought you a bus ticket." And my dad thought about it for a minute. Ultimately, he said, I can't do that. I have a shift tomorrow morning. I need to make a few extra bucks before I head back to college. And so thank you, but I'm going to pass. The next day, my dad's two friends stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and watched Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. deliver his "I Have a Dream" speech. I remember as a kid hearing this a number of times from my dad, who would often tell me, make sure that in life you know what's important. And for God's sake, if you have the opportunity to get on the bus, get on the bus. And that has stuck with me forever. Now, today, I know that many of our law firms, our companies, they're slashing DEI budgets. We're getting attacked on the legal fronts from a Supreme Court decision that actually doesn't even relate to the corporate programs we're involved in, but people are trying to make hay out of it. So we're facing a lot of resistance to these programs and what we're trying to do. But that doesn't mean that we have to stop investing our own time and energy into these really important and meaningful programs. On the contrary, I would say it's more important than ever that we continue to keep going. Someday, I think, I'm fairly certain we're all going to look back at how programs like Patent Pathways and ADAPT changed our profession forever. And my hope is that all of us can identify and recognize what's important, because I'm here to tell you that the bus is here and there is a ticket with your name on it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. Your story, like you say, your dad tells the story over and over. Your story does not get old for me, and it moves me every time that you tell it. That's what this program's about being courageous and having a seat on the bus. And a lot of our law firm partners are doing just that. They're getting a seat on the bus to change diversity in the patent field. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So I'm actually going to hand it over now to our moderator, Rachel Rodman, who's going to introduce our panelists and begin our discussion on interviewing and hiring. Rachel.
Thank you, Elaine. And thank you, Jeremiah, for that really inspirational start to our discussion today. My name is Rachel Rodman. I am a partner at Ulmer and Byrne in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm a bit the Sesame Street, which one of these is not like the other, in that I'm a litigator. So I litigate all types of IP, patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, in really any forum where somebody will let me. And I have the honor today of moderating a panel of really fantastic professionals who are going to talk about diversity in hiring. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. Let's start with Ritu.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ritu Singh. I'm a partner in our intellectual property department here at Dinsmore and Scholl in Cincinnati, Ohio. I focus on patent preparation and prosecution across technologies that range from AI to automotive guided vehicles to biomedical device work. I'm passionate about volunteering, and I'm involved in a lot of programs, both external and internal to the firm. So some of the nonprofits I'm involved in, both, also at the leadership role. I'm the president of the SABA Foundation, which is South Asian Bar Association North America Foundation, also president of SABA Ohio, programming chair of the Greater Cincinnati Minority Council program. I'm also a co-chair of the Asian IP Professionals Resource Group, the IPO D&I committee. There's a mouthful there. And internally at the firm, I am part of the diversity committee and on the committee for the Women's Initiative and the Minority Attorney Affinity Group. So quite a bit to do beyond my day job, but it's something I am passionate about and really am one who wants to seek to move the needle and just absorb what I can to pay it forward and to share and hopefully be part of that effort. So I think I'll pause at that point.
Thank you, Ritu. Let's have Reggie go next. Did we get you on audio, Reggie?
I think it works now.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can everyone
Perfect.
hear me?
Yes.
So I do apologize about having some technical issues, and but I came in at a wonderful time because Jeremiah, I feel completely inspired by your comments, and I will take that phrase to make sure that you get on the bus with me because it encapsulates so much. Just a brief background about me. My name is Reggie McGahee. I'm the global head of diversity recruiting here at Reed Smith. My claim to fame is that I'm a colleague of Anupma, and we're pretty much right across the hall from each other. But prior to joining Reed Smith and demonstrating a commitment to making sure that our profession is reflective of the society that we are all a part of, I was the dean of students and admissions at Howard University School of Law for 20 years. And part of the reason why I transitioned over to this side of the bar is that for such a long time, I know that my colleagues and I in the admissions and student affairs world worked really hard to bring in diverse talent who I know is amazing and dedicated and really committed to the notions of joining this noble profession. But it was a little disheartening that within 5 years of them passing the bar, that the attrition rates were so high and that we weren't just losing them to other parts of the industry, but we were losing them completely and that they were departing the profession. So I felt that it was important that I at least peek into this side and spend some significant time trying to figure out what's going on, not because I assume that I can fix the problem, but I do think that when we have dedicated and invested individuals working towards the solution, then we can move that needle. And I think programs like this, especially pipeline programming, is important because this is where we start to lay the roots so that a generation or 5 years or 2 weeks from now, then we have a much better profession. So I hope to do my part in some significant way in getting us there.
Thank you, Reggie. And then last but certainly not least, we have Anupma.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I'm Anupma Sahai. I'm a patent attorney with Reed Smith based in the Washington, D.C. office with Reggie. My practice focuses on preparation, prosecution of patent applications. I previously studied mechanical engineering and then worked in automation engineering. So now I work on mechanical and software technologies. I'm a mid-level associate, so early career, and I'm excited to provide that perspective today and super excited to be involved with Patent Pathways.
Thank you all so much for being here today. We have an excellent panel and I think we'll have a great discussion. I am going to exercise my authority as moderator and skip over some of our initial questions about the motivation for this discussion, because I think that Jeremiah and some of the intros have kind of covered that. And I want to jump, if we can, Samantha, to our first poll question. Hopefully we can.
Yeah.
It's always a little, when I go out of order, it's always a little risky. All right, so just focus on the first poll question at this point, which is how many bias trainings have you attended? And I think that this is a great first poll question because I'm guessing for most of us, the answer is a lot. And we're hoping that this one will give us some new and exciting strategies for dealing with diversity in hiring? Give everybody just a second. I tried to vote. It won't let me vote. I'm not allowed to vote. Feeling disenfranchised.
I
but
know, I tried
I know.
to.
I try to vote too.
We're all feeling disenfranchised. Okay. Well, I'm assuming everybody's had a chance to vote. So do we get to see the results now?
I'm still getting, it looks like a bunch are still,
All right, we'll defer to you, Samantha. I can't see what percentage we have.
so we have a little over half of our participants have responded. And so the question was, how many bias trainings have you attended? We actually had 0% of our attendees answer 0. So that's great. It looks like
Okay.
at least some bias trainings are happening. The majority of our respondents, about 80%, have responded 1 to 3. And then that just went down to 67%. So 2/3 have attended 1 to 3, and then 1/3 of our attendees have attended 4 or more.
Excellent. So as suspected, we are somewhat preaching to the choir today. So we want to make sure that we're giving everybody new strategies and new thoughts on how to move forward and accomplish diversity in hiring. So let's start by talking about unconscious bias. And I'm guessing if people have been to other bias trainings, then this is not new information. But I'd like to have our panelists talk some about what's your understanding of unconscious bias, and particularly some of the different types of biases that come into play in hiring. And let's start with Ritu.
Sure. So I've been going to these trainings for years, and I learn something new each time. For unconscious bias, the thing that really rings true to me is how it's a shortcut in your brain to stereotype. There's just so much data coming into your brain at any given point that your brain is wired to just really get to the shortcut of what is that stereotype. And that's happening unconsciously. It's not really done with intentionality. So that stereotype creates that automatic bias. So, if somebody might be speaking slowly or might be a diverse woman or something of that nature, the automatic bias might be, oh, that person's not assertive, right? And so that's something. It could be across the board. It could be, race, gender, age, just across the board, all of these different qualifications, and every single one of us has some form of unconscious bias.
Thank you. Reggie or Anupma, do you have anything to add? What types of biases do you think are particularly pervasive in the hiring context?
Well, from a hiring context, we have to always be mindful that there is also a privilege that goes into unconscious bias. For example, quite often when you're in an organization and you are the interviewer, then sometimes it's important to remember that the pressure of being on the other side of the table, being under screening and evaluation, and just the sensitivity of that. And I think to Ritu's point, it's the consistent training that we go through to untrain ourselves for something that we've been trained our entire lives to do. I think even when we think back to our elementary education, we're taught to put similar things together and then make correlations or relationships, and then we can make judgments based upon those relationships. It's at the core of our training, and that may work with a math equation, or that may work with a science project, but that doesn't work with evaluating people, because there's so many different variables that go into the growth and the nurturing and the development of individuals. And it's not, and sometimes it's a defense mechanism, sometimes it's just out of, and to not be judgmental, but out of laziness, out of habit. And it's important that we have to remember that it is unconscious, and the only way to undo unconscious behavior is to aggressively and actively train ourselves to notice and be aware, and then therefore actively act against it.
Yeah. I think in the interviewing context, it is really important to recognize that it's unintentional, like Ritu mentioned, the unconscious bias that comes up. It's just that the legal profession is by definition risk averse, and people are looking for one type of candidate, and that's the shortcut they make. And it's not that they're not willing to see other types of value and sitting in front of them, but they just don't have the awareness sometimes. And with the time and investment pressures of interviewing, I think it's just kind of hard to get out of that box. So it's good that we have programs like this to kind of bring more awareness to other types of value that you can recognize in the interviewing context.
And
Thank you.
Rachel, if I
Oh,
may, to
please.
go back to the point that you made earlier, you know, the difficulty of DEI training in many cases is that we are speaking to a captive and a willing audience. So it's important that when we think about unconscious bias training, that it be more organizational wide and that it's encouraged across multiple sectors, because usually the people that need it most are those that are most resistant to getting it. So we have to make sure it's just not a voluntary part of the process, but it is a part of onboarding, is a part of institutional advancement and structural development of the organization, because quite often the people that are usually going to be involved in this process, again, because it's unbiased, aren't always aware that they need the training.
Agreed. And you might want to go back to a point that you made about lawyers being risk averse, and ask all the panelists, do we as lawyers, are we more prone, do you think, to biases in the hiring process because of the nature of what we do or what our dominant personality types are? Anybody have thoughts?
I think sometimes the structure of interviewing in the legal context can definitely be limiting for how we bring people into the profession. There's so much institutional knowledge when it comes to legal recruiting that diverse attorneys, prospective attorneys might not have access to, like OCI, like what that is, how to get into a groove with interviewing during OCI, or like in the patent context, the Loyola Patent Fair, maybe a diverse attorney who doesn't have contacts, they don't even know about that program. So I do think in the legal realm, having these structures can be exclusive in our field, and just goes to lawyers being risk averse, like kind of looking for candidates in these places that can be exclusive.
I would agree with that. I think part of it, if you really think about lawyers, and maybe this is me exercising my unconscious bias to the legal structure, you have a system like, let's say at a law firm, where, you know, a lot of people believe it's about the billable hour, and this is like certain things you have to do to be successful, and just this lockstep type of system that people believe is there. But as you go through it, and if you really push for diversity across the board of what does that mean, people are more open. But initially it is, you know, people looking for that candidate that they believe will be able to, you know, make those billable hours and keep the client happy and things of that nature. So I do think, and then change can be scary for a lot of lawyers. This is what's worked in the past, and this is what we're going to keep on doing. So that's why I think also with these trainings, especially maybe for audiences that truly are the ones that need to be receptive of it, multiple trainings and getting into that level of awareness, and also just innovation in industry beyond like IP as innovation, but a lot of businesses focusing on how can we get diversity of thought into businesses. So I remember going to a presentation once about how there was a company that was actually looking at diversity of people on the spectrum, to have different people on the team to come in to provide a different pattern of thinking to really increase the overall product. So I think it's something I do agree lawyers are probably, and I'm sure there's data, I know there's data backing this up across industries, more resistant to change in many ways. But things like this is why you need to advance the change, and then it becomes more normalized once you realize that innovation is key.
You know, well, just to echo both those points, because they're perfect points, it's also to realize that it is attachment to fear as well. Because, for example, if you get a traditional candidate from a law school that's ranked in the top 10 and they finish #1 in their class and they check off all the traditional markers of success, and then they fail, then the assessment isn't that there was something wrong with the evaluator. The assessment assumes that there was something wrong with the candidate. But if you take risk and then that doesn't work, then there is some reflection that I think people feel will be about their assessment and whether they missed something or whether they didn't see something correctly because they took a chance or a risk. So it is in part making sure that you support and build systems that allow for that divergence and that variance, and not to assume that that the only way that things can be right if they're 100% perfect. We have to start getting into the mindset that grace needs to be built into the process, and that failure is also, or at least divergence from perfection is also a part of the process, because that's where organizations truly thrive and grow, is when they put new elements in, allow those elements to grow and thrive, and then the organization becomes better forward.
When understanding that we're all already willing to diverge from perfection, we just are only willing to do it with people who meet a certain
Exactly.
preconceived notion of what is a good candidate. I think of lawyers as, what do we know about unconscious bias? It's a shortcut, like the Virtue said, that our brain takes, and we're more likely to not catch our unconscious biases when we're tired, when we're stressed. And I don't know about other lawyers, but I hear that we're all very tired and very stressed a lot of the time. So, so I often wonder if we are more prone in general to letting our biases get the better of us because we don't always have the clear thinking. So is it even more important going into hiring to make sure that you're aware of that and that you're bringing your best self to the hiring process?
And Rachel, just as to add on to that point, I some time ago conducted Zillion researched on this topic of bias in AI and hiring. And that's just another good example of, like, there was a story years ago of another company that was trying to train a system to go through candidates to see who might be valuable candidates in computer science realm. And the system, because of the training data that was put in, where I think 98% of the candidates were men, trained itself to automatically discount any woman candidate applying. Now, of course, that wasn't intentional. That was unconscious bias because of the people training the system and the training data set. So you take that and you apply it to the human brain. We have those bias training sets, like, in our minds from what we perceive, what we've seen. So if you're able to be more conscious of that, be more aware, that helps. Like, there's ways of mitigating these AI systems, and there's ways of mitigating our own unconscious bias. So that's just another example I wanted to present, because it was specific to hiring, and it's something that shocked a lot of people, where they're like, oh, this can be the result. All of a sudden, this, like, non-prejudiced computer, apparently was supposed to be non-prejudiced, is now saying no woman candidate is qualified for this role.
I love that example because it's the perfect example for putting in what you think are non-biased metrics and then getting out exactly what you're getting out with your non-biased metrics, which is a very biased result. So I'd like to talk now about specific personal experiences that you have all had with bias. And if you're willing to talk about, Jeremiah gave some really good, a good example of his own personal bias. I know that I have examples of personal bias in my past, times when I've had to catch myself. And do you have, as panelists, do you all have any situations that you can think of in your past where you caught yourself in bias or realized after the fact that bias was impacting your decision making?
Yeah, I guess I could start with that one. It's something that it's been done to me, and I have caught myself doing this to other people and trying to just be more aware, especially the older I get. But one's just age, and I tend to be someone who's always looked, what I've been told, a lot younger than I am, and I've had a different path. I worked as an engineer for 2 years before going to law school, worked as an attorney, went back to get my master's, came back to work as an attorney. So oftentimes people along that journey thought I was a lot younger than I was and would treat me according to that unconscious bias, where I had a wealth of experience and eventually discovered that for me, the opposite of imposter syndrome is anger, where you're like, wait, I am here, I've proven myself. Going into that prove it again bias, like, that rang true for me. With that being said, and the older again, when I started interviewing people fresh out of college, I have to shift my mindset of, hey, everybody has their own story. So one example is a 1L who I was talking to this past summer, and I'm, trying to give advice and trying to assist, diverse woman, trying to assist this person. And it wasn't until we were having this conversation with others and I was sharing my story, she's like, a lot of what you're saying rang true, because she told me she was in her mid-30s, right? This is another career for her. And I found myself, I just assumed she looked young. I assumed she was, maybe not straight through, maybe a few years, but to then be open and to hear her story, it really did hit me how, I just exercised upon her what I very often would get annoyed of being the recipient of.
I remember early in my career, needing to be checked, because whenever I would have a physical labor activity to do, I would always reach out to one of my male coworkers for assistance. And then one of the women in my office came to my office one day. She asked me, why don't you ever ask me to lift things? Do you assume that I can't, or I won't, and I realized that it was just the conscious decision, maybe through how I was raised, that men are supposed to do the manual. Whatever the reason, I realized that I should just start asking for help, period. And it seemed something small, but it resonated with me, because I thought I was being helpful, when you can't always assume that even the things that you do in a polite sense are going to be well received, or won't have a negative impact on those in the environment. Because I'm sure the male candidate that I kept going to was probably fostering some resentment that he had to do a lot of physical labor, when it also reminded me that everyone could chip in and help in some significant way. And it wasn't intended to be dismissive, but I could understand how even our intentions don't necessarily convey every message that we're aware of.
I think I've definitely had biases that kind of make me gravitate more towards women in every context. Like, I remember going to a conference recently where I didn't know anybody, and my immediate thought was, okay, where's like a group of women that I can approach? I would never have thought that about a group of men, but I think it comes from different experiences I've had, where a lot of experiences that Ritu actually mentioned too, like people thinking I'm a lot younger than I am, or that I'm not an engineer or a mechanical engineer, or I'm the co-op, or I'm not a lawyer, I'm something else in the company. And a lot of the people that kind of imparted those biases on me are men. So then my reaction has been sometimes to gravitate away from men and more towards women. But I share this too to say that, like, a lot of things I think people ahead of me dealt with, people still deal with nowadays. So I always think to myself, what can we do to kind of change the dynamic so that the person after me isn't experiencing all this, or maybe has a different example of what they can do, instead of kind of walking away from a group of men towards a group of women, like I've been doing sometimes. So actually, recently-ish, I was part of an interview with a candidate, and the person I was interviewing with was a white man. And I purposely kind of weaseled my way into the interview, because I found out that the candidate was identified as a woman, as I do. And I thought I should be there, and nobody asked me to, but I was like, I got to be there if the candidate's a woman. And I did that because I recognized my biases, and I didn't know if the candidate knew her biases, and that maybe she would open up more if there was another woman in the room. So I kind of wanted to game her biases, like I sometimes wish I could do for myself. And what resulted was, I thought, was a really great interaction. She, at the end of the interview, brought up some questions that I thought were just really positive. She asked about our company's diversity programs and had a lot of follow-up questions. But what I noticed was she asked those questions directly to me. And I knew it was because I was a woman, and she wanted to know as a woman what the company would be like for her. And the positives I took away from that interaction were that she was super thoughtful. She knew her values and she wanted to know if the company's values matched up. And then also that she was just super courageous for asking that question that can be hard to ask. And especially in an environment with a power dynamic, with a question about if she's steering the conversation in the wrong direction, if we just wanted to know about like her legal and technical experiences. And I was able to relay these positives to the people in charge of hiring. And I don't know if she would have asked that question that revealed these positives if I wasn't in the room. And so going back to my original point, I think we have these biases, but not everybody's aware of them. And so I've recognized them from personal experiences, and for the people after me, I try and set a different example so that they can kind of game their biases in a positive way versus kind of what I've been doing.
Yeah, and
I love that. I love that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ritu.
Oh, no,
please.
I was just going to throw onto that. Yeah, that was fantastic synopsis, and a few points just came to mind from that of, talking earlier about between us about using your own affinity bias, finding the commonality, and this could be used for positive. So as that aspect, I think affinity groups, one thing I know we do at Dinsmore too, we've been working on this is with the women's initiative, is making sure whenever, there is a woman candidate, letting them know, or, with our minority attorney affinity group, if there's a diverse candidate, making sure they're aware of these groups and having somebody present who can speak to it, but having ambassadors. So even if it can't be somebody from that committee that's present, making sure everybody is aware, and that's inclusion in hiring and these interviews. A lot of people, might not just be, let's just talk about how you could be a good lawyer. Let's talk about your interests. And a lot of them, if they, a lot of them have done research and they'll recognize certain people are part of these groups and just ask those direct questions. Like, what are some of your policies, or how often do these affinity groups meet? Things of that nature. So I think that's excellent, Numa, that you were able to have that experience.
And if I may, I think I agree, but it goes to one of the solutions to combat some of these issues, which is to make sure that we have diverse interview panels. So, we can put structures in place to make sure that they're diverse, but and to a degree, this is slightly unfortunate because I do feel that a lot of the progress for inclusion and equity in organizations is driven by the people that are seeking inclusion and equity. We have to do a little bit more to make sure that as Anupma mentioned, that the next generation isn't dealing with the same things that we've dealt with. So it's making sure that when we know that there are candidates coming in, that we are a part of those interviews, that we can advocate for and speak to an experience that many people in the room might not otherwise be familiar with, and offer some unique perspective that may allow them an added advantage to continue to advance and impress. So it is one of those situations where I do think that it's a burden that we have to shoulder, but hopefully it's one that we appreciate and that we see as, as we've been able to make it in advance and to rise on the shoulders of those ahead of us, that we have the same obligation to the next generation.
We know diversity improves outcomes, and it just stands to reason that diversity also improves outcomes in the hiring process. And I love this idea of gaming our biases for good as opposed to evil. Let's take a pause and do our second and final poll question, which will come up on the screen, but I will read it to you, which is: think of the 6 people you trust the most. How many of them are the same race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation as you? And I'm assuming it's multiple choice, but when Samantha gets up there, we'll see.
Yeah, so it is, and it does look like everyone actually already filled it out.
Oh, excellent. We just get the results.
Great job, everyone. Okay, and so your options were 0 to 1. That was almost a third of our participants at 29%. 2 to 3 came in at 19% of participants, and just over half indicated 4 to 6.
Yeah, and I loved this poll question. And I'll be honest that I was not as happy with what my answer to this poll question would have been as I would want to be, right? You know, it's not zero, but it's not 6. And so I'm not sure what the right number is, but it really makes you think about, what does your circle look like? Who are you surrounding yourself with? And you know, why does that matter? Does that help us with interrupting some of the biases that we're going to bring into the hiring process?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, if we can acknowledge that diversity is good for business, then the corollary has to be that it's good for our personal perspective and our lives in general. And the richness of your life is a reflection of the people that are around you, in my opinion. So by bringing different people together, then we have to recognize the influence. And, you know, I agree. I'm not as impressed as I hoped I would be with my answer either. And so it looks like I have to go out and make all new friends. So hopefully anyone on this phone call or this Zoom that would like to be my friend, then please do. But I say that to say that we all have a lot more work to, none of us come perfectly, or there's always room for improvement. And I think that's part of why events like this are important, because not only are we stepping into hopefully a vulnerable space and being, you know, a little more transparent, but then we're reminded to make this a practice that's a part of our lives on a daily basis, not just something for work, not just something to meet an objective, but to just make us better human beings in general.
Yeah, and Reggie, you mentioned in the last discussion about how we're all kind of doing these programs and this work because we've had a personal stake in it. And I think this poll question reveals something else that we can all do, which is reaching out and being friends with and hearing people that are different than us, bringing them into these groups. And that's one way we can expand our circles personally, and then also with these initiatives.
So I want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we're going to try to do some questions here at the end. But I want to end with two final discussion points for our panelists to make sure that we're walking away with some strategies. And those are, and we can talk about them together, or you can talk about them separately. What can we as individuals do to improve diversity in hiring and retention? We talked about some of those, but what other ideas do we have? And what can our firms and our institutions do to improve diversity in hiring? And I'll let you guys jump in.
Yeah, I guess I could jump into that one. Some thoughts I had was this example of sometimes when you're interviewing, I just recall when I first started interviewing, sometimes you have these like all-day interviews, and now with OCI they can be virtual, which, you know, is very efficient in some form. But there are points, and maybe some of the shorter interviews, where I'd be done with the interview, ready to like fill up this like automated evaluation form that gets sent to you right away, and I would get a call from my co-interviewer to automatically kind of share everything they thought about the candidate. And I remember the first time it happened thinking, well, this is a little odd because I have my own points of view, but okay, I'll hear what they're saying. It's like, oh, you know, are they trying to sway me? Like, what's going on? It wasn't anything ill-intentioned, but I did think, okay, this is odd. But then I've always felt comfortable saying, okay, well, I thought this, but I see where you might be coming from there. You know, so I never am the one to pick up the phone to do that, because I know there's like, you know, pros and cons of that. But if anybody's in that situation, great. You know, one of the recommendations is never really have that done internally. But if it does happen, and it will likely quite often happen, being vocal and presenting your viewpoint, whether it's similar or opposite, you know, or just trying to find something that might be a little different that person might not have considered. So we each have, you know, our own viewpoints, own bubbles, own insights, and being vocal and sharing that. So I would say one recommendation is institutionally maybe discouraging that for people who are interviewing. But at the same time, if it happens, just mentioning, you know, be vocal in your own thoughts.
I really like that one, because you want to go along with the group. You want your opinion to be the same as the other opinions. I'm a litigator, so I want to fight with people, but generally human beings don't want to fight with people. They want their opinion to be kind of shared. And so you could see people's thoughts on a candidate kind of moving to get to the same point as everybody else's. I'd never thought of that before. I really like that.
You know, when we were discussing this in the prep, you know, after the call, which I was really inspired by, and I really wish that the attendees could have been a part of that conversation because it was inspiring for us as well. I went home and I really thought about, some things that I appreciate that Reed Smith is already doing, and then some of the things that we're attempting to put in place to improve our hiring process, not just for our attorneys, but also for our professional staff. And I just wanted to maybe recount a few of those that I do think that they're helpful. And let me also add, I'm sure that many of us are doing them already, but I do think just in case is a good recap. So I think first, to be very critical and very clear on job descriptions and requirements, not adding things to job descriptions that aren't necessary to the function of the position. A lot of data has shown that women tend to opt out of jobs at the review stage simply because they don't think that they meet 100% of the job qualifications, where men, if we get to 50 or 60%, then we're throwing our hats in the ring. And so we could be eliminating a lot of really dynamic and wonderful candidates simply because we're adding things that aren't necessary for the job. So be very clear and clean in the job descriptions, only focusing on actual skills and qualifications necessary for the role. And I think it's also important, especially in the atmosphere that we're in now, to highlight a commitment to diversity and inclusion in the job description, to already signify to any individuals that are looking to apply that not only that there is no distinction between excellence and diversity, that there is the assumption that diverse talent is excellent talent, and then that can be placed in the job description because it helps you in two ways. One, it highlights your values, but in my opinion, it also steers away people who aren't going to support that notion and support the environment that you're trying to create for your staff and for your community. As I mentioned earlier, diverse interview panels are important. You bring those unique perspectives, those unique lived experiences, because after the evaluation, or to be honest, even during the interview, that can come into play and completely change the tone and tenor of a conversation. I do believe that having structured interview questions so that there's some consistency, sometimes you get in a good ebb and flow with someone and it may spark some questions, and that's fine, but you at least want to have the same core questions that everyone can respond to in a thoughtful way that's relevant and germane to the job and the expectations of the duties in front of them, so that there can be a fair and balanced conversation and evaluation afterwards. And then something that I think a lot more organizations are doing now are blind resume screening, where they remove any indicia of race or gender, where you're truly just evaluating the person based upon their experience and their skill set. And one thing that I hope that everyone will do is to understand that evaluation and transparency and feedback are important. You want to engage with the people that are going through the process, make sure that they are aware of the timeline, the expectations that you're communicating back, because even if you ultimately do not hire that individual, they're going to speak to their community and to their colleagues about their experience with your organization. And you can leave a good impression that can help tremendously in the future if someone in their circle comes into your hiring process in the future. And I think one thing that yields from doing that is that when you are fortunate enough to hire candidates, that allow them to strip down your process and ask them, hey, now that you've gone through our process most recently, what are some things that went right? What are some things that you think that we can improve? And sometimes this is the more difficult part. We should ask the people that didn't get hired either, because those two perspectives may give some key insights that allows the modification and the evolution of your program and your hiring process and protocol that can make it better overall for all those that follow in the future. And then the last point I'll make is to always understand that we have to look at this as a living, breathing ecosystem and organism. It's never going to be perfect. We're always going to try to improve. And it's always looking at it from a sense of, okay, this feels good, but how do we make it better? And if we are always in that tense state of how do I improve this, then I think we'll consistently evolve into a better place.
Fantastic. We have no questions. So Anupma, one thing we didn't talk about that we did talk about in our excellent prep session that Reggie mentioned is how do generations of age play into this? And do you see any ways that some of us who might be older could interact differently on diversity with younger generations.
Yeah, it was a great discussion. I appreciated all of y'all's attention there. I kind of mentioned some of this earlier. Like I'm butchering this, but like the definition of madness is like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Things that people ahead of me have dealt with today, yesterday, 10 years ago are things I'm dealing with too as a younger millennial. And so what do we do differently to make sure that the people after us have a good experience initially so that they, don't open up that folder where they file away all the bad things they've experienced and then eventually leave when the folder starts overflowing. And I think everything that all of y'all said about how to interview people, even if you're not going to hire them, that's really important. Having diverse teams, being open. And I think just recognizing that the barriers in the legal field that we are coming up in, those just have to be taken down. And that might mean saying something that's not well received to peers or bringing people into these groups when they might not really want to be in the group, or forcing your way into an interview that you weren't invited into, or asking people questions that help them open up and feel an affinity towards you. Just kind of being disruptive at every step of the way. I think a lot of people ahead of me kind of walked more of a straight and narrow path and played a game that now we should try and change so that people after us have more opportunities and less baggage.
Yeah, I loved that discussion, and it really brought home are we trying to help our younger colleagues navigate a bad system, or are we trying to fix the system? Like, which one of those do we want to be doing? And I think clearly we need to be fixing the bad system, but how often are we instead coaching our colleagues on how to navigate the bad system by doing the same things that we had to do, which frankly we shouldn't have had to do. So I thought that was a great take, and I so appreciate you bringing that up.
And to a degree, it forces us to be courageous, because
Yes,
it forces us to use our capital. It forces us to use our positions of influence and put them at risk, because if the organization doesn't necessarily support the view, then it could be uncomfortable. But again, we've talked about this issue ad nauseum for generations, and it's going to take the courage that we should all have, having gone through it and lived through it, to improve this.
we are at 4:00, and we want to be mindful of everyone's time. I want to thank the panelists for letting me moderate the discussion today. And you go to so many of these, you start to feel like you've learned everything, and I've learned so many new things and got so many new ideas by talking with all of you. So I appreciate very much getting to be a part of this with all of you, and thank you to all of our audience for joining us as well.
Well, I hope that we'll get together at least once a week and have these conversations, because
I'm game.
it has been helpful for me too. So I thank you all.
We'll be our new circle of trust. We're more
Exactly.
diverse already.
Exactly.
All right, well,
Awesome.
thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Thanks everyone so much for joining. And I will send out likely tomorrow when it's ready, a recording of the webinar that you're welcome to share within your firms, organizations, pull ideas from, and you can feel free to reach out to me with any additional questions. But thank you so much again to our wonderful moderator and panelists. Thank you all for spending the afternoon with us.